interest, of course, maybe aren't particularly positive, and so that's not something that we're happy about, but it's great to see this many people here online with us. For those of you who haven't joined our events before and don't know me, I'm Jordan Gans-Morse. I'm Associate Professor of Political Science at Northwestern University and work mostly on questions related to Ukraine and Russia. I want to thank Jeff Eden, the faculty director of the Russia, East European, and Eurasian program at Northwestern, for helping us get all of this set up. And we have a fantastic group of panelists today. I'm going to take a few minutes just to quickly introduce them. And they're going to be talking about three critical topics and things related to these topics, which is number one, what happened on Friday in the Oval Office and how can we interpret it? Number two, what is the view like from Ukraine in terms of how policy from the United States looks with respect to Ukraine and Russia? And number three, more broadly, how do we make sense of Trump's emerging policies towards Ukraine? The panelists that we have are Tymofiy Mylovanov, the president of the Kyiv School of Economics and also former Minister of Economic Development of Ukraine. Ian Kelly, former ambassador to Georgia and a former career service officer who is now a professor at Northwestern. Neonila Glukhodid, who's a PhD candidate in political science at Northwestern and also herself originally from Ukraine. Maksym Andrushchenko, who's an associate professor of political science at the Kyiv Aviation Institute and just recently, a couple days ago, arrived from Kyiv to join us as a visiting fellow at the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs at Northwestern. And Olga Kamenchuk, who's an associate professor in the communications department and the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern and an expert in public opinion throughout Eastern Europe and Eurasia. I'm going to turn it over to Tymofiy first to get us started. Each person's going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll have an exchange among panelists and open things up to Q&A. To the extent that you'd like to pose questions, please feel free to post them into the chat, and we'll do our best to address them towards the end of the event. So thank you again, and Tymofiy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, so what happened in the Oval Office? There's been so much analysis. I'm going to offer something which I think is a little bit missing. I think Ukrainians do not understand, and actually, frankly, Europeans and maybe some of the US people too, that and might be wrong about this. So with all these caveats, I think Trump is driven by on Ukraine policy is totally driven by MAGA views. And then Zelensky is totally driven by majority of Ukrainians' views, and they are almost not overlapping. So what are those views? So the MAGA view is that Zelensky is not a hero, but a corrupt beggar. This is, for me as a Ukrainian, and actually as a US person too, is extremely insulting to hear. But that apart, we're not in, I'm not in a value judgment business right now. I'll keep it to myself. But that's a perspective. Then that money is not going to solve the problem, or support will not solve the problem, that it is a European war, that the US should disengage with it and leave it to Europe. And in fact, if the US doesn't disengage, it risks escalation even further and getting into a conflict with Russia. Not that MAGA people like Russia, they dislike Russia, but they don't buy the Ukrainian story, Zelensky story. Now, Zelensky's story is very different, that we should not reward the aggressor because there will be a domino effect. And what happens in Ukraine is critical to Europe, and it's also critical to the future of the United States. So this is a very different disagreement. There is one point of agreement that everyone says that, or everyone agrees that the Biden administration handling of Ukraine was lukewarm and indecisive. But the disagreement is that the supporters of Trump would like less of the US engagement to zero engagement, whereas supporters of Zelensky believe that if the US disengages, then basically it's all over While maybe, Ukraine will stand, but many more people will die. Russia will get emboldened, and the security situation in Eastern and Central Europe will deteriorate for good. So I think basically from that disagreement, what Trump wanted to have in the Oval Office is a signing of the mineral deals where he can claim that, okay, we're not spending money, we're getting money back. Whether it's true or not, it's actually not true. That's not what in the deal, but he would be able to claim that, and he was claiming that on the day of when it all went, that they are not involved anymore, and there's no security guarantees in that deal whatsoever. And then Zelensky wants peace, and he is the commander in chief or peacemaker in chief. That's basically what Trump would see as an ideal outcome. Zelensky wanted an opposite outcome. He would say, listen, we are willing to engage with you, but we need security guarantees. Russia is a real threat to Europe, us, NATO, and the US. And he was trying to explain that. Now, that's in terms of content. In terms of personalities, I think everyone is very dignified. These are all strong ego, strong energy, strong leadership personalities. And on top of that, there is G.D. Vance, and G.D. Vance and Zelensky have this conflict since the campaign trail, where there were comments by Zelensky in New Yorker about G.D. Vance, very strong comments. And I think the grudge is still there. And so G.D. Vance then at some point attacked or suggested, pushed harder on diplomacy and other points. And then at that time, I think Zelensky volunteered to try to explain his position and did it in such a way that allowed, a conflict to escalate. So all parties are frankly guilty of escalation rather than de-escalation. None of it is presidential, but I sort of, it sort of fits the style of both presidents. Zelensky is a very strong-willed leader who is not gonna fold. He will keep his line, and that's why Ukraine is standing today, because he kept Ukraine standing when Putin pushed with military. Okay, so but Trump and Trump is a very strong leader who also won't have anything around him who is not given his talking point. So I think both parties are talking. Views and values which are very different from each other and somewhat overlap, but not that much, and no one is listening. Basically, I think that's what happened in the Oval Office. I mean, I'm not saying this is the main thing which happened, but I think the rest has been discussed. Whether it was a trap and not different views on this, was it press set up or it just happened in the moment? And could it have been signed, the mineral deal? Could it have been avoided? Who is more at guilt? All that has been in the media, and I think there's nothing new I can add. But I think I see this really very different understanding of the Ukraine policy on both sides. And the disagreement is that Ukraine wants more US involvement. The current administration wants less to zero US involvement in Ukraine. And that's the real conflict. The conflict is deeper than what we have seen as a conflict of personalities in the Oval Office. Now, that doesn't mean that it will not work out, because I don't think everyone, Trump wants to be seen by his base weak when he deals with Putin. I think he can't afford also to look weak to Putin. I know there are very different views on this, but that's just my view. I also think that as a result of this conflict, both presidents consolidated their base. Zelensky approval ratings went up. I think MAGA is very happy the way President Trump protected the interest of the United States in their view. But I think it is hurting everyone except Russia, frankly. So, it looks like locally everyone benefited, but it's like two Vikings fighting with potential damage to both countries. So that's basically would be my take on this. If I am trying to be neutral and put my personal citizen views aside, because I personally find it appalling. I think it's very dangerous, but I'm not going to get on that train because I think everyone who follows me knows my views.
Thank you, Timothy. That's a fantastic way to start off the conversation. Maksym Andrushchenko, we're going to turn to you next.
Okay, good morning from time of Chicago. Good evening into time of Kyiv. I will start with a quote of famous historian, Greek one. It's Thucydides. The strong do what they have to do, and the weak accept what they have to accept. And I don't want to say that my country, Ukraine, is a weak country, but I would like to say that we have a lot of problems connected with diplomacy and the diplomatic corps. It's a real problem because for the last 34 years of independence, we don't, still now, we don't, and for my mind, from the scientific view or political science, we don't understand the interest of others. And that is the main point of view. And if we say about the situation that happened on Friday, I may say that it was a poor level of preparation on a diplomatic level, firstly, because when I see the ambassador of Ukraine sitting without any poker face, but she's showing all the emotion she has, I may say that's a real problem for diplomacy. And I may say that there was no, I don't like this term translator. I would say there is no interpreter was during this conversation. It's important as well because I must say that was no preparation for the President Zelensky and I don't understand truly the motives why it happened till now because it's rather hard. There are a lot of different points of view. But I may say that it's a real problem of Ukrainian diplomacy. It's a real problem that for a long time we were supporting only the Democratic Party, not communicating with Republicans. And remember when told this situation, Pennsylvania during the election campaign, that was as well very interesting. So I may say that there is different understanding of interests. Trump, to my mind, and I can say that have solidarity with Timofey. Trump doesn't understand the interest of Ukraine, and unfortunately, we don't understand the interest of the United States. And I would say about as well MAGA. That is more important. I do believe that Trump administration is coming back to the in the terms of foreign affairs to the pure realism, that the national interest is the key. And I do believe that Trump wants to build the relationships with strong countries that have power. So that is the main problem. And as far as you remember, after the Second World War, America became a global leader. And all the time, if you listen to the rhetoric of Trump, rhetoric of MAGA, even yesterday, he told that the golden age of America has begun, that we are coming back to from declining to having the global leadership power, etc. So I may say that that is the point of view what is going on in a domestic policy in the United States. And there was a good issue about how Ukrainians, what was their attitude, what happened on Friday. So I may say that what I see and what I speak to my colleagues that a lot of Ukrainians, they were proud of the President Zelensky, that he showed the dignity, that he was invictus. They were writing that really need guarantees, and the president wouldn't sign any deal if there are no guarantees, etc., etc. But the thing is that we need, not Ukrainian people, but Ukrainian people as well, but Ukrainian authorities, they need to take off the rose-colored glasses at last and understand that it's a new architecture of world order world policy, and the national interest should be the main. And if we understand what the United States, our partner, wants us to do, then maybe we could understand. But there is, it's real, as I told you, it's a real diplomatic problem, because our diplomacy is not so, has no such tradition as you understand, US one and other countries, because we're a young country, only independent for 30 years. And I suppose that in the future, something will change. So that is my position. But I would like to say as well about the attitude. For Ukrainians, it was, as I told you, it was like President Victor said, it was like dignity, such reaction. But then it changed with, you remember that Zelensky yesterday made a post on a Facebook with apologies, so-called apologies. And some Ukrainians, some of my colleagues, they don't understand. If you are just Invictus and you have your own position, you've got to go till the end. But now he decided to step up back.
Thank you, Maksym. Fantastic. Neonila, we're going to turn to you next.
Thank you, Tymofiy and Maksym, for great points. I think I will mirror a lot of that myself. So when I think about all these questions, Jordan, that you posed, it brings me back to generally thinking about Trump's foreign policy, and I'm very excited to hear what Ian will have to say about it. But overall, I think the critical issue there is understanding the change that the US has underwent in terms of foreign policy when Trump assumed office. And I think there are two dimensions to this. One would be a style of foreign policy. Trump seems to be very transactional, very fast-paced, high-pressure tactics, and fast results-driven foreign policy. And this creates particular structural conditions for how he engages for other countries. And on the substantive dimension, so I'm not sure whether this would be really a thing set in stone, but I must thank on Vance and his Munich speech and his pivot to post-liberal norms, really. In how far this is an ideology is difficult to say, but I would not dismiss this altogether as a factor. And I feel like, to mirror what Maksym was saying, it really is very important to look at the American national interest. And I feel like there is a lot of redefining right now happening for the Trump's administration, and we probably don't have a very clear understanding what these are, but what we can see for now already is there is probably some departure from soft power, like the drop of the foreign aid is key there, and probably departure from liberal norms. So in this sense, when we think about Ukraine and how it needs to position itself vis-a-vis the US, it really isn't the split only on a personal dislike level between Trump and Zelensky that might have began back when Trump requested some help with like Biden's son, maybe 5-6 years ago. I think it really does run deeper, and in a way, Ukraine for MAGA base became liberal issue. It was one of these issues that progressives and Democrats like. For Ukraine, this is not a good place to be. And conversely, when we think about what Trump's definition of national interests is, it probably is much more hard national interest, geopolitical balancing vis-a-vis China. Johnson was talking about the need to separate Russia from China, and Ukraine kind of plays into that. And I don't think that as of now, Ukraine is part of Trump's understanding of American national interests. I think that probably the mineral deal was an attempt to do that. Is still like this, probably still trying to position Ukraine through mineral deal as part of the American national interest. Whether this will play, it's difficult to say. But overall, I do agree to Maksym. We are probably back to the age of realpolitik, great power politics, with all the talk about Canada, Greenland, territorial expansion. I don't think in this world there is a place to pivot to moral norms. This is the right thing to do. It really needs to, probably Ukrainian foreign policy really needs to rethink the whole framing. In terms of Ukrainian public opinion, I am based in Chicago right now, so for me it's difficult to really decisively say what it is. But I think Ukrainians are also kind of realpolitik people right now, and they understand that whatever is being promised as security guarantees through mineral deal are not security guarantees, because just having American financial investment is not going to deter any aggression. Everybody understands that. Companies, if needed, will just leave. They probably will not even invest to begin with. So I think my impression is that people really do understand there is there is a need for sustainable peace, and I think population of Ukraine would support different solutions. I don't think that there is still the predominance of very maximalist goal in the sense that we want to enter and seize Crimea tomorrow. I think people are quite realistic in the sense of cost-benefit analysis and all of these things. And Ukrainians definitely do not want war, protracted war, or to lose war. So I think that there needs to be a real security guarantee for any Ukrainian politician, be it Zelensky or anybody else, to be able to defend it vis-a-vis public. Because I think the common understanding, at least my impression, is that if we do not have real security guarantees from America, NATO membership, like really solid stuff, then the war will resume. So, and the second round, it's unclear how it will go. People will probably leave, etc., etc. So in that sense, I think that Zelensky's room for maneuver, but any other politician's room for maneuver would really be limited by more or less common understanding that it doesn't look good. Russians still maintain and hold to very maximalist goals in this war. They haven't retreated any inch back. And I myself am not particularly clear when the Trump administration tries to pressure Ukrainians into peace, how that's gonna help with Russians not being willing to do peace. Because as of now, neither Lavrov, nor Putin, nor anybody else from Russian administration has articulated any willingness to do proper peace in the configuration where Ukraine can plausibly expect to exist for the next foreseeable future. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Neonila. We're going to turn now to Olga Kamenchuk.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, colleagues. As a professor of bargaining and negotiation at Northwestern University and someone who studies global opinion, global public opinion, I want to focus on how leaders use power, leverage, and perception to shape outcomes of negotiation, and what can be the implications for the foreign policy. So let me begin with what happened on Friday at the Oval Office. It wasn't, from my perspective, it wasn't just a diplomatic breakdown. It was a live demonstration of Donald Trump's negotiation style in action. He's very famous to be using so-called hardball negotiation tactic numerously before. He uses high pressure tactic. This includes extreme opening demands. Remember that President Trump pushed for US control over Ukrainian resources, the mineral deal, and he tightened the conditions. And this was part of a peace deal from his perspective. And then the second second characteristic that he uses is walkaways. The failure to sign an agreement on that day, or framework for the agreement, was not purely strategic, and Trump did genuinely become frustrated during the talks, but he does that. And finally, contradictory messaging. When he praises Putin numerously and during the negotiations as well, while pressuring Ukraine into concessions, is something that he is doing. But here's the key. Even though his frustration was real, he was really angered, the overall approach was still in line with his usual tactics. Remember that. There are some examples from the past. For example, during the NATO talks, during his first presidency, he attacked allies publicly, accused them of freeloading, threatened to withdraw US support. He even was considering leaving NATO, as you remember. And he forced European leaders to pledge increased defense spending. And then he boasted, he said, that he got a win. Now, with Ukraine, he is doing similar things that he has done before. He applies public and private messaging and pressure. He tries to back Ukraine into the corner and frames US as a purely transactional ally in this case, or mediator, as he said. What advice I would give to Ukrainians in this case? First of all, keep emotions at check. It's extremely important. I know it's hard, but that's the key. Not to panic when Trump is trying to walk away and use his tactics. His walkaways are temporary. Engage beyond the White House. Congress and the American public still play a significant role in shaping the policy, regardless of where we're drifting right now. And you need to remember that while congressional Democrats are strongly supporting Ukraine, congressional Republicans are not solid. They are not all pro-Trump with regards to Ukraine. Then third advice, keep your coalitions and keep them in check. Coalitions usually help weaker negotiating parties to strengthen their position, but they tend to shift. There is such danger too. And finally, frame Ukraine's value to Trump in the way he understands it. It's not about values for him. It's not about democratic values. He believes in economic and strategic benefits for the United States. He is transactional, right? So that is important. Now, with regards to where we're shifting, in terms of Trump's policy with regards to Russia and Ukraine, again, we have to understand three factors from my perspective. One is that we are in the world of transactional diplomacy, not value-driven democracy. Unlike pretty much all the past presidents, whether they were Republicans or Democrats, who framed Ukraine as the democratic ally, Trump sees every negotiation in terms of the benefit. In this case, US benefit or his benefit. I want to bring up an example from recent past. I remember what happened in Syria in 2019 when Trump abandoned Kurdish allies once he saw no further value in keeping US troops there. Now Ukraine faces the same situation, same challenge. Now continued US support will be based on what America gets in return. It's not on shared democratic principles. The second factor is Republican voter sentiment that Trump is following. The Republican voter sentiment is shaping policy. Currently, if you look at the data from Morning Consult, the recent studies conducted a week ago, 37% of Republicans now say Ukraine should cede territory to Russia. That's a sharp increase. It's not majority, but it's a significant number. Zelensky's favorability among Republicans has dropped to 26%. And 39% of Republicans see him unfavorably. And at the same time, Putin's favorability among Republicans is higher than among other groups. It's 17%. I mean, it's not 26 as Zelensky, but 17 and 26 is not very far away. I have to say, though, and emphasize that regardless of the political affiliation, Americans view Putin negatively, unfavorably, 2/3 among Republicans and 3/4 among Democrats. But the attitude towards Zelensky has become partisan. It's changing further. Now you have to understand that we see these patterns also applying to Ukraine as a country and support for it. Now, the third and the last key factor in with this regard, strategic unpredictability and keeping everyone off balance. Trump tends to deliberately create uncertainty to increase his leverage. He has done it numerously during his previous negotiations and during his previous term, we saw it. Remember US-China trade war. He switched between praising and attacking China, keeping Beijing and US business on edge. He is doing it. So for Ukraine, this means policy could change unpredictably. One day Trump threatens to cut aid and the next he offers a new deal. So to sum it up, what we need to remember. So first, Ukraine should expect a tougher and transactional relationship under Trump, and it's already seeing it, and there will be more. Trump's frustration does not mean negotiations are over, the ones we saw on Friday. It means he's pushing for more leverage. Even though I think he was genuinely angry. Congress remains a key battleground. Ukraine should engage beyond Trump himself, include more work with media and public opinion, especially with conservatives who are shifting now away from Ukraine. And Russia, unfortunately, in this case, is positioned to benefit unless Ukraine and its allies push back strategically. So last Friday was not just a diplomatic dispute. It was a preview of the next phase of US-Ukraine relations, nothing we have seen before. Trump's anger was real, but his tactics remain consistent with what he has done before and that we have seen. So Ukraine must stay firm, adapt and engage the broader US political system, audiences, media to secure its future. I think it has the potential, or maybe I'm an optimist. I would like to be.
Thank you, Olga. We're going to turn now to Ambassador Kelly.
Thanks, Jordan. Those of you who logged on to our last discussion of Trump and Ukraine, this was after the election, before the inauguration. You may remember that I expressed some hope that Trump had adopted the slogan "Peace through Strength," which came from Ronald Reagan. And of course, what Reagan meant was, in order to deter the non-free world from attacking us, we, the democratic states, must stay strong. Trump's interpretation of that is that the strong will dictate peace terms to the weak. That you see it in Trump's admiration for the strong and his contempt for the weak. And unfortunately, we saw it in all of its gory glory on Friday. And I thought the most illustrative thing that Trump said was when he turned to Zelensky and said, "You don't have the cards." And what he meant was, you are weak and Putin is strong. To keep up the card metaphor, you must fold. So so he means that, Putin is the strong one, you're the weak, you must capitulate. I will say, looking at what are possibly the positive aspects of this, and my colleagues have already mentioned some of these, is there were some positive aspects to what happened on Friday. One was, first of all, the mask that the pro-Trump Congress and his administration were keeping about the Trump foreign policy, that it's Reagan-esque. It's not Reagan-esque. Maksym, I thought, recalled the most, I think, illustrative principle. And that's what he said from Thucydides: the strong will do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must. And this is also why Trump hates the European Union, because he sees the European countries individually as strong, both economically and militarily. But if they can unite, and of course, what he did on Friday was probably the best uniting event, if that's a proper term, for Europe that has happened since World War II. They immediately got together and showed solidarity with Ukraine. Just I will cede most of my time, but I do want to mention one other thing. This point of view that the strong can do or will do what they must, and the weak must suffer, explains a number of some of these head-spinning pronouncements of Trump, that he will take Greenland, he will take the Panama Canal, he will annex Canada. This is all part of this whole idea that these weaker countries must submit to the strongest country in the world, and that's the United States. We need these countries for our economy, we need for our security. We're going to take them. And he actually said that in the State of the Union address last night. He said, I forget exactly what he said, but when he was referring to Greenland, he said, well, I hope that they're going to agree to come, but we're going to take it no matter what happens. So I think that the incoming German Chancellor, Merz, recognized this America for what it is. He called it for what it is. We are unreliable. It pains me as a career diplomat to say that, but you cannot rely on United States foreign policy anymore. And also Kaja Kallas, the EU commissioner, said, we need a new leader of the free world. And this is why the EU must hang together, and it must take in Ukraine as soon as possible, because Donald Trump will not respect any of you individually unless you unite and bring in Ukraine. It's the only way to earn the respect of this very, very flawed and unfit leader of the United States. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
You are all extremely modest panelists. I think this is the first time I've ever either been on a panel or moderated a panel where everybody is under their time limit. So thank you everybody for that and for all the insightful comments. We have a number of questions coming in through the chat, and some of them are being answered by panelists live if people would like to look there, and we will get to more of them. We have about 20 plus minutes for Q&A. I wanted just to follow up though before we bring audience questions in to several things that were said. In particular, Maksym's point about the lack of preparation and diplomatic background work for this last meeting, or maybe more broadly, I'd be really curious to hear, Tymofiy, if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, I know that you have enough, maybe not on the diplomatic side per se, but connections to the Zelensky administration. And Ian, I'd love your observations as someone who's been on the U.S. side planning meetings like this, and especially with respect to one particular question I have, which is, this all may make sense that Zelensky wasn't prepared, but what I don't understand is that if we go back over the past 3 years, it seems like he's had many meetings around the world where he's been excellently prepared, where he's really nailed it in terms of what you say to the French, what you say to the Germans, what you say to very specific groups, what tone you strike, whether you're trying to make them feel guilty, whether you're trying to feel, make them inspired. And so if there's general lack of preparation, it hasn't seemed to show until now. And so I'm just curious to hear some more comments from Tymofiy and Ian, and anybody else who would like to jump in on this.
All right, so I guess I will start as my name was called first. I think he was prepared. It was his choice. I mean, then of course, the tactics might have been, as a very difficult situation. He's exhausted, but his overall view, he has been advised multiple times by his team, by the US senators and congressmen, not to challenge Trump. Let him have this win, let's sign the mineral deal and be done with it, and then play it the same way Macron and Starmer played it. They didn't disagree with Trump on any completely crazy, incorrect stuff he said. But then they softly tried to move it to the extent possible. And all the fights they would have had, if there were any, were behind the doors. That's not the path our president has chosen. There are reasons why, and different people have different views. So it's definitely not without controversy.
Yeah, just to add a few thoughts to that. I don't think any staff could have prepared or I don't think the Ukrainian staff could have prepared Zelensky for what happened. I mean, this has never happened in the history of the United States, where the president of the United States has grossly mistreated, insulted, demeaned, etc. The head of another state who is his guest. So it was impossible to prepare for this. In the case of the U.S. side, well, the president controls that room. A normal president, as soon as it started to deteriorate, would have said, "Okay, let's take the press out and let's have a frank talk." But he just let it play out because he liked it, because it was great television, as he put it. It was great for ratings, but it was a total disaster for diplomacy. So I don't fault staff for not preparing Zelensky for this. I will say that he did kind of go for the bait that J.D. Vance prepared for him, because J.D. Vance wants this all to fall apart, including the agreement that they were supposed to, because he's already laid out his vision, before the inauguration. He wants a North Korea, South Korea situation. He wants, that there's just an agreement on a line of contact and that's it. no more fighting, no more weapons transfers. So he probably should have just decided that he would stand up for his country and then just close it down. But he continued to rise to the bait, unfortunately.
I have a couple of words on that question
please.
as well. What could have been done differently, and whether it would have helped? Conditional mood is always the question when we judge history. It's whatever happened. But we could have helped President Zelensky to anticipate Trump's hardball tactics. He could have rehearsed some counter moves, like redirecting the conversation to mutual benefits, bringing concessions to offer first, things like that. Maybe managing Trump's emotional volatility, and that he uses walkaways. Macron in NATO talks, for example, used flattery and personal report to keep Trump engaged and to avoid these public blow-ups. Also maybe work a bit more with building Republican support in advance, because Trump's approach is influenced significantly by his base, and he is trying to appease his base. The question, though, could this all prevented the disaster? Well, possibly, but not entirely. Even with preparation, Trump's emotions, instincts, they all come into play. They still would have been a hard bold tactic and a hard discussion. But Ukraine can learn from this and in the future deal with this emotional volatility of Trump, engaging specifically Republican allies, because it already has Democrats, and try to put Ukraine's value in the terms that Trump understands, very transactional. That's the reality.
Maxime, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would like to say maybe there was another scenario. Maybe Zelensky didn't want to sign anything. Maybe he just wanted to come and to see what he will be like, what will be the reaction of Trump. Because remember, after he came to London, he wanted to know the position of the European Union, etc., etc. And maybe he thought that during this conversation with Trump, he could, like, I don't know, is it correct to say he could play like a poker? Maybe something will happen positive and maybe everything will be okay. But as we saw, he just flew to London, and all in all, in several days, he posted a message on a Facebook that was called a letter, that with apologies. So he understood that from the European Union and from the Europe, he will not get such without the support of the United States. It's impossible to end the war. So maybe it was another scenario. Maybe it was planned. So we don't have a full picture of what is going on. So, but I don't want to play like conspirological games, But all in all, we may think about this scenario as well.
Timothy wants to add something, and then I want to move on.
My understanding is that the Ukrainian side was ready to sign, the US side was ready to sign. That's my understanding, is based on conversations I had with teams who were part of the negotiation. So I don't know if it's true. I'm not challenging any of the theories. I'm just trying to bring it what I know, the facts that I know. I was on Saturday before the deal was on Monday, kind of pre-agreed. I've seen the doc, like in the meeting with the negotiating team on the Ukrainian side. I've seen the multiple versions of the deal that Ukrainian side and the US side negotiated to be signed in the Oval Office was acceptable, was pretty good relative to the benchmarks, and even in an objective world would benefit Ukraine. So I think my understanding is that the Ukrainian, and by talking to people who were supposed to sign it, I think people were considering the situation that everyone was ready to sign, basically, on the flight to the Oval Office, on the flight to Washington.
I want to step back to the bigger question that several people are asking, which there's several variations of this in the chat, but essentially, let's say that Trump is ultimately put down an ultimatum that more or less is in line with exactly what Putin wants. That there has to be neutrality, meaning no NATO, demilitarization, occupied territories aren't going back to Ukraine anytime soon, and so on and so on. We talk about the specific details. Based on what panelists have already said, we've already talked about the extent to which Zelensky has limited room to maneuver because of public opinion and because of what many elites in Ukraine think as well. But it seems that Trump is operating, and tell me if you guys think I'm wrong, but under the assumption that the U.S. has so much leverage that if he pulls the plug, Ukraine has to surrender or has to do what he wants. So where do you guys see the two things meeting? What happens if Trump truly just takes the most pro-Putin side they can? Where does it go from here from Ukraine's side? Is there any chance that Ukraine says, okay, we can't do more, so we stop? Or where does it go?
Well, yeah, I'll start. So one thing that I think a lot of people don't appreciate is that at the end of his administration, the Biden surged a number of arms, particularly replenishment of air defenses and of artillery. And I think, from what I understand, that will hold Ukraine till the summer. So that does, I think, give Europe a chance to do two things. One is to get its act together to step in, to come up with some sort of unified agreement to continue on without the United States. But I think the other thing is the $300 billion that sit in European banks from the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think the time has come to stop worrying about how the markets are going to respond. I think the markets will recognize that this has now become more of an imperative that Ukraine get access as kind of an advanced reparations for the brutalization of their country. And that money could be used to satisfy Mr. Trump, Mr. Transactional, as Olga has properly characterized him. That would satisfy him to send more weapons because it's cash on the barrelhead, as we say in English. And it's not the kind of gift that suckers and losers like Biden and the previous Congress did.
Any of the other panelists to this point?
I mean, I would probably weigh in line with Ian Kelly, but I'm more skeptical about Europeans actually using the funds from the frozen Russian assets. I feel like Chinese there would be strongly opposed to that. And if they threaten to start dumping euro, it's a big deterrent for Europe. So I think for me, the worst case scenario of Americans completely pulling out, then the question becomes, can Europeans actually put something stable long-term together? I'm more optimistic on that front in general because the war really does hit so much closer home to Europe. Like my sense is that in Europe, the understanding of the war is very different from the US, and it's a very geographical thing. So in that sense, but then again, you have Orban, you have Fico, people who are on edge. Italy is trying to hedge between the US and Europe, and it is unclear whether there is a chance for unilateral move, but I'm optimistic about it because we had similar doubts about Europe at the beginning of the invasion, and yet continuity arose and fairly big commitment arose. And I feel like Europe is really much more committed and much more predictable in that sense than Trump's administration.
A couple of words on the assets as well. This is a highly debated question for over a year by now. I'm giving interviews on this question for a long time already, and it has a valid point. But I have to say that while many European nations support the idea of using these assets, I'm pessimistic as I was a year ago about the feasibility of this action. There are legal and political challenges with regards to that. Legal precedents are weak. EU never seized the sovereign state assets for redistribution, and doing so would set a new precedent that would be legally challenged in European courts, and Russians are ready for that. Example, Iranian and Venezuelan assets, the freezes happened, the similar freezes happened, but funds were not permanently confiscated. They were used as leverage for negotiation, and I think, as before until now, and I think that the future of these assets is a good bargaining chip for negotiations with Russia. Now, there is also some reluctance in Europe with regards to these assets. While there was a period of time when US was pushing for seizing the Russian assets, some European countries were hesitant because they fear retaliation from Russian side, because Russians could seize European assets in response. And also it can harm the Europe's image as this safe haven for finances from other countries. So using the interest generated from frozen assets, which is being done, is what could be used. This is also, though, Russians are still prepared to contest this in court, so there will be a fight for that, a battle for that. But at least it could provide some funding for Ukraine. I think the most useful future for these assets is to be used for negotiations. It's a strong bargaining chip, I think. That's it.
There's a question here in the chat that's following up to something that I believe Tymofiy Mylovanov posted on X about the Trump administration today, not only saying that they're cutting off intelligence support for Ukraine, but that they want European allies to do the same. And we don't have a military expert, unfortunately, on the panel with us, but I'm curious about this to the extent people have information about what that story is in general and what the thoughts are about whether Europe will comply, but also more broadly, how critical and unique is U.S. intelligence support vis-a-vis Europe? If Europe going forward is still providing intelligence support, but the U.S. is not, does anyone on the panel have a sense of where that leaves Ukraine?
Well, Europe doesn't have the intelligence assets that we have. And I'm talking about the real high-flying eyes in the sky. That's the big difference. And that's why this precipitous withdrawal from keeping a stake in Europe's security, as Mr. Hegseth told allies week before last, is really terribly unfair, because the alliance has decided that the U.S. will maintain this capability and that Europe will provide the troops. So I do think that it will have I don't know if it will be a game changer, that the Ukrainians will no longer have access to this very specific kind of pinpoint intelligence when it comes to targeting, but it certainly is not going to help.
I do believe that this intelligence data from the United States is extremely important for Ukrainians, especially for military. And but I am like, let me say that surprised with the position of the U.S. administration. It's like a position, as I told, of a strong country and a weak country. When a strong leader says, "Oh, if the negotiations would go in a proper way, we will give you, we will check the situation and everything will be unfreezed." It's like, you know, like elder brother is speaking with a youngster, is telling, if you do such a thing and if you will be good, I will give you a candy. If you're not, so you will not get anything. So for my mind, it's not a proper way of like negotiations. Like I don't understand it.
Thank you all. There's a question that just came up in the chat that I want to build on a little bit. And the question is, what about all the damage that Russia's done to Ukraine, not just in terms of physical damage, but to the number of people killed? And doesn't Russia owe something for this? And shouldn't that be part of any ceasefire agreement? And I mean, there's obviously the normative side of this about what should happen and what many who support Ukraine would hope would happen. And earlier in the war, there was, of course, when things were going better for Ukraine, a fairly maximalist understanding, I think, among many Ukrainians of what they expected the war, you know, the war would end when the people responsible for it, meaning Putin, people around him, paid some price for it. Given that we're far away from that realistically right now, what are people's thoughts about what happens in terms of some level of punishment for Russia? Does just nothing happen? Is there anything that's done in terms of future deterrence? Or right now, do we just see that the reality is it's not a good situation, and Russia basically is going to walk away from this with only the pain that they've, that Ukraine's inflicted on them in a tough battle? We got, I think, Neonila and Tymofiy both raised hands.
I can go first if Timothy is fine with that. I think for me, it all comes back to world order and whether we will have any functioning hegemon, or at least an institution that would enforce things like that. I find it quite difficult to believe that under Trump administration, International Criminal Court will get stronger and more effective and will actually be arresting people. Like, normatively speaking, of course, there needs to be consequences, but realistically speaking, I think good if we can, so to speak, survive and not have to cede officially territory, so to speak, right? But I generally feel like we are, with the US where it is, seemingly, we are entering quite volatile territory, and it is very unclear what will be of international legal order and how effective these institutions will be, and which one will survive through the turbulent times and which one won't.
Thanks, Timothy. Did you want to add to this? And then after that, we're just about out of time, so we'll give each presenter a minute or so to wrap up with some final thoughts if they'd like. But first, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this specific issue, Timothy.
So the Russia punishment issue is, you can separate two perspectives. One is what is just, and the other one is like, will they do it again? Is there deterrence? So of course, justice will not be achieved, at least in the short term. There's simply no infrastructure, even with Trump completely behind, all in, willing to go to war with Russia. We are far away from being able to, let's say, bring Putin to court. So even in basic sense of judicial justice or international law justice is not going to be achieved for a while, or maybe not at all. In terms of deterrence, there are two views on this. One view is Russia has gotten emboldened and it will continue to be aggressive and it will move on Baltics or Georgia. Well, it might not have to do Georgia, what not. There's an alternative view, which is, look, it's a US view I've heard here from people somewhat around Trump. Even when we didn't give much to Ukrainians, Russia couldn't take it when Ukrainians were not ready. So, Russia is not the Soviet Union Russia that we had to have NATO for, which was, it's a lot of posturing, they're brutal, but the only way for them to really achieve any progress on the battlefield today is truly to sacrifice a lot of bodies. So they are fundamentally a weak country, unable to work out well-planned operations, combined arms operations. It's an old, large, but Soviet army, which is weakened. If Europe is willing, Europe will be able to deter it. Whether Europe is willing, that's another question. I'm sort of subscribing to the second view. And I think the future deterrence requires not some specific conditions on settlement, but expanding defense capacity of Europe and Ukraine, both at the manufacturing level, technology innovation, talent, merit-based promotions, but also getting combat-ready troops in numbers. That is the real hardcore deterrence, because it's not going to be nuclear war or diplomatic war. It's going to be what we have seen on the ground, physical, kinetic warfare with units moving forward. So we have to have drones, we have to have intelligence, radars, detection systems, ability to strike if anything moves. right? Both political and physical ability to strike. Europe can do it. Yes, absolutely. Is it willing to do it? We'll see if this is talk or, if they're gonna walk the talk. So that's my view on deterrence.
Thank you. And I want to give each panelist just 30 seconds to a minute max as we wrap up. Whoever wants to go first, please jump in.
Well, the clock is ticking, so I'll jump in. I think that my advice to Ukraine and to our erstwhile European allies is just repeating what I said, basically. Do not try to placate Trump. Do not think that you can mediate and try and get a better Trump, a more a Trump who will suddenly see the value of standing with Europe. It's just not going to happen, and it pains me to say it, but that's going to be the situation till at least January. Doing the math quickly, 2029. That you can't rely on the U.S. Our Constitution gives the president complete control over foreign policy. And the legislative branch has not shown any kind of backbone to stand up to him. Judicial branch has, though.
Okay, I can go next. So clearly, Ukraine has entered now a new phase in its relationship, not only with the United States, but also the world, relying much more on the coalitions and alliances there. Trump's negotiation tactics won't change. And then shifting US public opinion is also obvious. The growing European concerns, all of this create a much more complicated and uncertain, ambiguous environment for Ukraine. As to the future, Ukraine definitely needs to adapt to that. It must engage beyond the White House, beyond the Democrats, build bipartisan support in Congress, which is doable, I hope, and must frame its discussions and negotiations in terms of interests primarily, not really values, or at least not democratic values that it used to appeal to before. That path will be complicated, and it will need resilience not only in the battlefield, which we have seen already, but also in diplomacy, negotiation, public messaging and such, American public messaging, because it's changing right now. As the questions of the reparations, frozen assets, and Russian accountability, they will remain unresolved. It won't settle overnight. I don't see it's happening in any close future. But how the world and Ukraine and Europe will navigate them will define the future for the region, whole region, not only Ukraine, but the whole Europe and the world. I think we are in a very complicated situation now, but it's not like everything is falling apart and the house is completely on fire. We can do it.
I would follow Olga's points in the sense that it is very critical, I think, for Ukraine to find a working relationship with Trump's administration without necessarily caving to Trump's negotiation style. But American military aid is critical. Its intelligence, its striking capabilities, its resources. Europe could replace some of it, but America is a big and critical player in this. So I'm not in a position to recommend anybody any type of course of action, but this would be my wish. And I agree to Olga, it's a very volatile, unpredictable situation. And I think one would want to prioritize certain things over the others, and probably right now, find a working relationship with White House and securing more or less stable alliances in Europe would be the critical part of it.
I would like to say that the time to take off the rose-colored glasses has become, and it's the real time to understand the interests, the national interests of our partners, and to build a proper diplomacy according to this interest, and not forget about our national Ukrainian interests. And speaking about the last, what I would like to say is there is no punishment for the Russia and Putin, because it will not help us to bring back the people, the heroes who died military. It will not help us to make Ukrainians who went all over the world, to make them come back. And that is a real problem, and we will have to think about the decision of this problem in the future.
Thank you, everyone, for fantastic insights, and thank you for everybody who's joined us today. We will, I think, still be seeing a number of events on this front occurring quite rapidly, and as they do, we will do our best to keep up and do more events. So thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon, and we really appreciate you all being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending.
Take care.